Assalamu alaikum, everyone. You are listening to episode 35 of the Muhammad Ghailan podcast with yours truly as the host. Before I get into today's episode, I'm just going to preempt some background noise that might come up on this recording, and I may not be able to clean it up. So I apologize for it. Despite living in a new apartment building, and despite it being 7:30 in the morning when I'm recording this, my neighbors seem so unhappy with their apartment that they just have this impetus that they need to renovate and work with drills and hammers at 7:30 a.m. to I don't know what they're doing. But anyways, I guess you can tell that I'm a little bit upset by this. So, episode 35. We are back after a hiatus for Ramadan. Every Ramadan, I take some time away. I check out of social media. I just step away so that I can have. You're wanting to during this time. You should look to minimize your distractions, your external noise, the level of intense stimulation that you get externally. And the idea behind it is that Ramadan is supposed to be a time of spiritual renewal. It's a time of spiritual rejuvenation. And I take it as an opportunity to do as much of that as possible. And if you look at the last third of the month, the last 10 days of Ramadan, you're encouraged to go to the mosque and literally sever your ties with the external world and spend your time in a mosque 24 hours a day as much as possible. And just really engage in either Quran recitation, prayer, litanies, remembrance of God. That's what you do with your waking hours. It's also a time that for students of knowledge, this is a time where you put away your books, and if you're going to open up and discuss anything with regards to seeking knowledge, it has to be stuff that deals with purification of the heart. This is not a time to become an intellectual. It's a time for you to basically get in touch with this other factor of yours, the soul, the spirit. Now, this got me thinking about something because when we enter Ramadan, I mean, the idea, if Ramadan worked out properly for you and it has transformed you in a way, the idea here is that you start the month of Ramadan with a baseline level of activity. And when you exit Ramadan, really what you should have been doing and thinking consciously about is that you should be picking up another thing that you do that has a spiritual component that you plan, at least you have the intention of, that I'm going to continue to do this forever until I pass away. This is a new thing that I'm going to pick out. Now, this got me thinking about something with regards to what does it mean to pick up a spiritual activity? Normally and usually when you ask many Muslims at least, what does it mean to pick up a new activity? The first go-to thing that we think of is maybe you should start praying these extra prayers, these sunnah nawafil prayers that you pray in addition to the 5 daily prayers. Maybe you should start fasting Mondays and Thursdays, or at least start fasting Mondays or Thursdays. Maybe you should start reciting more Quran. Maybe you should, we think about ritual, usually. And this got me thinking about a few verses in the Quran that I wanted to basically use this episode or take this episode as an opportunity to share some thoughts with you guys about what does it mean to be religious from an Islamic perspective. Because I believe just from general discussions and conversations that I've been having, and just observation of how it's being discussed, we limit the term religious, quote unquote religious, in our discourse as Muslims to a very provincial understanding. It's very tunnel visioned. And if you look at the Quran, and if you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and if you look at the lives of the companions and the lives of the righteous ones, the understanding that someone is religious is not limited to ritual activity as we understand ritual activity. Even our understanding of ritual is too limiting. In Surah Al-Hadid, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God Almighty says towards the end of it, in commenting about who came after the messengers, and he specifically mentions Jesus Christ, the son of Mary, where he says, I'm just going to read the Arabic and then translate it for you guys. ثم قفينا على آثارهم برسلنا وقفينا بعيسى ابن مريم. Then we made our apostles to follow in their footsteps. We sent Jesus, the son of Mary, afterwards. وآتيناه الإنجيل, and we gave him the gospel. وجعلنا في قلوب الذين اتبعوه رأفة ورحمة ورهبانية ابتدعوها ما كتبناها عليهم إلا ابتغاء رضوان الله. And we put in their hearts of those, in the hearts of those who followed him, i.e. speaking about Jesus Christ, kindness and mercy. And as for monkery, they became monks. That monkery, they innovated it. We did not prescribe it to them. Only, and they did it only to seek God's pleasure. فَمَا رَعَوْهَا حَقَّ رِعَايَتِهَا. But they did not observe it with its due observance. فآتينا الذين آمنوا منهم أجرهم وكثير منهم فاسقون. So we gave to those of them who believed their reward, and most of them are transgressors. What is this talking about? It's this monkery, this becoming a monk. If you look at the books of tafsir, look at the books of exegesis, the books of interpretation of the Quran, the scholars say that what they did was they basically left things that they had no basis, no religious basis to leave. They started to wear even rougher clothing. They started to retract away from the world. They started to spend their time exclusively in their hostels. They stopped engaging with the external world, and they stopped eating as much, and they started to do a lot of things that many people would consider as, oh, this person is becoming enlightened, if you will. This person is leaving material things for spiritual pursuits. And the way the verse is talking about it is this was not prescribed upon them. And this is something that is an innovation. Now, there is a man who came to the Prophet ﷺ, the Habib. He came to him, he's a Bedouin. And the thing about Bedouins, if you look at the hadith narrations that speak of Bedouins, really pay attention to them, because they're speaking about unlettered people. I mean, Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, who's this great theologian, he was walking one day, and he had his entourage with him, and this old lady sees him on the streets, and she says, "Who is this?" She didn't know who he was. And one of the students said, "Oh, don't you know who this is? This is Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi. This is like the great theologian. He has 1,000 proofs for the existence of God." And she said, had you known his reality, you would hit him with 1,000 pairs of shoes, 1,000 sandals. You guys would throw at him. And the man was just confused. Like, what? What do you mean you would throw that? Like, why? And she said, had he not had 1,000 doubts about the existence of God, he would not need 1,000 proofs. Now, Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, of course, as a theologian, he does not need to have 1,000 doubts for him to have 1,000 proofs. He's a theologian, so it's his task. It's like a physician. A physician is not sick, does not need to be sick in order for them to know how to treat an illness. They just understand what this illness is, and they prescribe the treatment for it. And so similarly for him as a theologian, this was his affair. He was dealing with a lot of people having questions, and so he came up with this. Now, despite that, Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, having heard what the lady said, he said, Allahumma imanun ka iman al-ajaiz. Oh Allah, oh God, oh Lord, give us a belief, a faith in our hearts that is similar to the faith of elderly women. And those of us who come from more traditional societies, traditional upbringings, had grandmas. I mean, I could tell you my grandma, may Allah have bless her soul, she was an unlettered woman, back in Sudan and Africa, like didn't know how to read or write. She just did her bare minimum stuff. But there is something about the faith that these people have that is different. And it is not a simpleton faith. A lot of us like to think of unlettered people, uneducated people, like their faith is simpleton. All they need to do is to be educated, so that we value complexity is really what it is. We think of intelligence as or faith having value only if it is derived from complex proofs and argumentations. And that's not really the case. And this is something I'm going to talk about, inshallah, in the next episode with regards to truth. But for now, just want to drop this maybe a little teaser that complexity is overvalued. A lot of times we overcomplicate things that are really simple. If you look at Islam as a religion and the belief that we require of people, that if you want to be a Muslim, this is what you need to believe, it speaks to the lowest common denominator. And that is not to demean the lowest common denominator. It's just to say that you don't need a philosophy degree to understand what La ilaha illallah means. This is something that speaks to the fitrah, to the natural innate dispensation towards what is true and what is pure and what is good and what is right. So when we say there is no God but the one true God, this is not a nonsensical statement. It is also not a paradox. It is not something that is going to require you to play mental gymnastics to wrap your head around if you just really understand what that means. And so this imanun ka iman al-ajaiz, this belief as the belief of elderly women, Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi is talking about a belief that is unadulterated, that is not confused, that is not needing any of these complex proofs and ideologies to try to explain and wrap our heads around. These are people that are living with nature as God's creation. They're in sync, they're in tune with the creation in a way that allows them to submit properly as a state of being to the Creator. So that's what the faith of the Bedouins. So the Prophet ﷺ had a Bedouin come to him, and he said to him, what do I need to do to be a Muslim? And he ﷺ just tells him, all you have to do is, just do obviously you're going to declare your testimony that there is only one God and that I am his messenger. And then beyond that, it's just a matter of you upholding your prayers and upholding your month of fasting of Ramadan and upholding your zakat if it's obligatory upon you, and doing your pilgrimage at least once in your lifetime if you're able to. So the man takes this and he says to the Prophet ﷺ, if that's all, I swear, wallahi, and he actually swore an oath, this is all I'm going to do, and I'm not going to add any more to it. He was not interested in doing Qiyamul Layl, praying at night. He was not interested in doing any extra prayers beyond the 5 daily prayers. That's all he wanted to do, and that's it. And he stuck with that. Now, he ﷺ said after the man left, أَفْلَحَ إِن صَدَقَ. He will be successful if he is truthful. If he just upholds these things, he will be successful. So this idea of wanting to add more as religious practice, and that indicates piety, we have to differentiate between the ritual and the character of the person, the state of being. There are many people, and I'm sure many of the listeners can relate to this. You know someone, or you've come across someone who is, from a ritual aspect, as pious as the day is long. They engage in all acts of worship. They focus so much on the ritual. But then when it comes to their behavior, you find that coming at odds with the ritual practice that they're engaging in. And that's why there is this woman, after she passes away, the companions come to the Prophet ﷺ and they say this woman was ritualistically a very pious woman. She prayed all the time, she fasted all the time, she did all of these things. However, nobody was safe from her tongue. And he ﷺ responded by, there is no good in her. La khayra fiha. There is no good in her. Hiya fi nar. She's going to be in the hellfire. In other words, if your acts of worship do not translate into altering your behavior as a byproduct of your altered state of being, that you have now entered into a state of submission that is in line and in tune with what God wants of you, and all you've been doing is just the act of worship, in reality, that is not any different from Iblis. Satan, nobody beat him when it comes to acts of worship. In fact, he was elevated so high, he was above the angels. It is said in the tradition that there is no spot in the heavens or in the earth except that Iblis has a sajda. He actually prostrated on it. So ritualistically speaking, Iblis is as pious as they can come. However, his state of being, the arrogance that he had, the original sin according to Islam, arrogance, rejecting the command of God to bow in front of Adam out of arrogance, that was his downfall. So when you look at religion, what does it mean to be religious? It is not going to be based on your ritual aspects. And that's really important to understand. When it comes to behavior and practice, it is one side of it, but it is not the be-all or end-all. A lot of us, after Ramadan ended, if you engage in Ramadan as you hope to engage in, many Muslims during Ramadan recite the Quran. At least they try for once to go through the whole Quran over the 30 days, if not multiple times. You will find Muslims that will go and pray at night. You will find Muslims that will engage in the 5 daily prayers. They'll somehow magically make it to the mosque when they never go to the mosque. They'll make it to the mosque during Ramadan for the 5 daily prayers. During Jum'ah, Friday prayer, when people are during the rest of the year are just showing up just in the nick of time to make it. During Ramadan, they're showing up an hour, 2 hours earlier so that they can sit and engage in recitation of more Quran, and they can engage in more litanies, and they will stay a little bit later after the Friday prayer is concluded so that they can pray more. I mean, it's a very intensely ritual month, and by the time you finish the month, you're actually tired, which is a very normal, natural thing to happen. You've exhausted yourself. You're spiritually exhausted. It's like engaging in a training camp for a major competition. And once you do and you finish it, your body needs some time of rest. And that's what happens to the spiritual powers. If you think about your spiritual muscles, you go throughout the year with one level and then you amp it up to level 10. You burn out and then you want to step back. Now, the challenge is, well, am I a hypocrite? I haven't done anything since Ramadan finished. What is wrong with me? I would like to engage in more acts of worship, but I'm busy with work, I'm busy with school. What I was able to do during Ramadan, I'm not able to do right now. Ramadan was in the summertime. I could take a break. I could schedule my vacation around it so that I can engage in all of these things. But now I'm back into the real world, quote unquote real world, and I can't do that. So how do I maintain, or how do I sustain an elevated level of spirituality if I'm not able to engage in the actions that I was engaged in? And one of the things I mentioned before the entrance of Ramadan, I think it was either in an episode podcast or of this podcast, or if it was a post, was to at least pick one activity and try to engage in it and make sure that you sustain it. But I want to broaden the understanding a little bit with regards to what that activity means, because when I say pick up an activity and maintain it, many of us think of, okay, I'm going to recite maybe a page of the Quran every day. I'm going to make that a habit, which is very good. Others might say, I'm going to engage in maybe adding an extra prayer so that, just a voluntary prayer, a nafila or something like that. But I want to broaden your understanding about this a little bit, because what we're trying to do here is get more connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and follow in the footsteps of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as much as possible, because we want to be in his companionship on the Day of Judgment. We want to be in the vicinity of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if possible to be his neighbors in paradise. We also want to be granted the beatific vision. We want to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from paradise. So we have these lofty goals. Is it only restricted to ritual? Imam Malik, rahimahullah, was asked one time, he was known to be one who liked to dress very well. Despite his poor upbringings, when he made it and he became this great scholar, he was receiving a lot of gifts and such. And so one of the things about Imam Malik was, if you want to give kind of a modern parlance to it, imagine Imam Malik going to, I don't know, like one of these high-end clothing stores, and that's what he'd like to buy. So his clothing was very expensive. He was very fancy with his clothing. He was also known to love perfume. So he used to get a lot of different types of cologne, different types of misk, different types of perfumes. His turbans were fancy as well, and his hats that he used to wear, his qulunsuwas. So he was known for this. So this man comes to Imam Malik, and Imam Malik was said one time that if you could eat meat every day, he would. I believe is what was his statement, which is kind of a luxury. He's talking about living a luxurious lifestyle. Now, a man comes to Imam Malik, and this man was known for his quote unquote asceticism, which is another thing that we can talk about maybe at some other point. But asceticism, the zuhd. This man used to basically, one of these people that you hear about that just has one item of clothing that they would wash every day and wear all the time. And if it gets cut, they would just kind of patch it up if it gets ripped. And this man was fasting all the time, kind of divorcing the world. And he comes to Imam Malik, because it's Imam Malik, and he says to Imam Malik, it would be better if you would leave this. Leave all of this clothing and all of this fancy living that you're living. Just divorce this for the sake of Allah. And Imam Malik says to him, Jazakallah khair for the advice, may Allah reward you, but recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens different doors to different people. Not everybody is going to enter into paradise from the same gate. Paradise, from an Islamic understanding, has different gates, and these gates are for people that seem to have a niche. And so Imam Malik says to the man, Allah opened the door for you for fasting and asceticism. That's a door. That you divorce the world and you become this type of a monk living type of existence. That's what resonates with you. This is something that you have the spiritual power to sustain and maintain and go through. And this is what you feel resonates more for you, to be connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As for me, the door that was open for me was the door of knowledge, the door of teaching, the door of scholarship. And that's what I'm doing. Now, it is said that with regards to the scholars and the students of knowledge, their qiyamul layl, their prayer at night, holding a night vigil for a scholar or a student of knowledge, is not going to be praying. It is going to be either studying or writing. And this is where intention comes in. The Prophet ﷺ, the first hadith you learn, for those of you who study hadith or those of you who haven't, the first hadith that you would ever learn if you go undertake a study of hadith is the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وإنما الأعمال بالنيات إنما الأعمال بالنيات ولكل امرئ ما نوى فمن كانت نيته إلى الله ورسوله فنيته إلى الله ورسوله فمن كانت هجرته إلى الله ورسوله فهجرته إلى الله ورسوله ومن كانت هجرته لدنيا يصيبها أو امرأة ينكحها فهجرته إلى ما هاجر إليه أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. That every action is by its intention. The judgment of action is going to be based on intention. We're talking about with regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah is going to judge your action based on your intention. If your intention is to make migration towards Allah and His Messenger, to God and His Messenger, then your migration is going to be to God and His Messenger. But if your intention with the action that you're undertaking is to gain more of this world, or to have a spouse, you're working towards getting a spouse. A lot of us, when we think about your education, the reason you're pursuing your education is because, I want to get a good job so that I can get married, so that I can buy a house, so that I can have kids and have them live a stable life and all of that stuff. If that's your sole intention behind what you're doing, the Prophet ﷺ says then, فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى مَا هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِ. He doesn't even bear repeating it. He says it's such a worthless goal, really, if that's your main goal out of whatever it is that you're doing, is to gain more of this world. I'm not even going to repeat the things that you're trying to go after. This is really what you're about. However, if your intention with whatever it is that you're doing is to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and closer to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then you got a different story here. In other words, whatever action you're engaged in, that could actually be transformed into an act of worship. To give you a simple example, you could be somebody who goes to the gym and you do your cardio, and you could think, I'm doing cardio for the sake of being healthy, so that I can have a good heart, so that I can have a good physiology, and that's great. You could transform this and think about, I would like to do my cardio so that I can increase my lung volume capacity, and my breathing rate, so that or my breathing capacity, so that when I recite Quran, I'm not taking as many pauses, so that I can, if you, for those of you who know Quran recitations, if you're reciting the Quran based on the recitation of riwayat Warsh an Nafi' an Tariq al-Azraq, this is a very hard recitation because the mudud, the lengths of some of the madda that you do is so long, like 6 harakat and so many of them. It becomes difficult to go through from between stops sometimes, where you recite the verse and sometimes you can go for a couple, 3, 4 lines of recitation without pausing at all. Now, if you have low lung volume capacity because you're out of shape, and then you decide, I'm going to go to the gym or I'm going to work on my cardiovascular capacity, my breathing, so that I can improve my powers in this, so that I can recite it better, so that I can improve in this. Now you've turned your physical activity at the gym, which most people would look at you outwardly and think you're someone who's trying to be in shape, into an act of worship. Another thing, you go to the gym, and it's not really about recitation of the Quran, but your understanding is this body of mine is a trust. It is not my body. This is a rental. This is something that I have while I'm on this journey in this earth. And I'm going to be asked about it. And I know that the beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Inna li jasadika alayka haqqa," that your body has a right over you. And so when I go and engage in physical activity, when I go to the gym, when I go outdoor exercise, whatever it is that you're into, when I eat right, I'm doing this for the sake of, this is a trust and I want to treat it right. In fact, the way I would look at it is, if I get type 2 diabetes, for example, which is an acquired form of diabetes based on a poor diet choice, based on my love of sweets and inability to stop them, that is a bad sign. That means I'm damaging this rental property that I have. And I'm going to be asked about it. Now you got a transformation of understanding. And so when you go to the gym and exercise and take care of your body, it's no longer just about getting Instagram picture fame or whatever it is that people are into today and the selfie culture. But it's more about, this is something that I want to give back, that's been given to me for now, and I have to return it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so I need to bring it back in the best possible shape that it's in. Recognizing that bodies wear and tear, just like a rental car does after you drive it for a long time. But what happens if you bring back a car with more than the acceptable level of wear and tear? You get charged. If you lease a car, they tell you when you on your lease contract that, you know, if it's a 48-month lease, you're allowed to drive this many miles on it or this many kilometers on the car. This is the appropriate level of wear and tear. When you bring it back, the tires have to be in this shape. If you've had accident, I mean, they have all of these different things. And when you bring the car back, they actually go through a checklist throughout the car body to make sure that it's in the expected shape that it should be in when you bring it back. The same thing for your body. So if you fix your intention, you can now change your level of understanding. You can change your approach to it, and it becomes an act of worship. So when we talk about act of worship, and being religious as a Muslim, it's a very broad umbrella. It's not just about, I'm going to pray and I'm going to recite Quran every day and I'm going to increase these things. That's great if you can do that. But recognize that there are more things to get into than just your ritual behavior. Your religious behavior could be these things. The Prophet ﷺ says, "Inna Allah jamilun yuhibbul jamal," that Allah is beautiful and He loves beauty. So you take that understanding and you think, I got to take care of myself. So for the brothers with their beards, you know, all this beard culture and stuff, we should be leading this, by the way. You know, this beard, getting your beard right and having the right proper cut on it, and you fixing it and making sure that you look pretty. Basically, you're looking handsome because Allah loves beauty. And so now it becomes an act of worship, that I'm taking care of myself as an act of worship because Allah is beautiful and He loves beauty. So that's just on the physical side of things. What about other things that you can do? There's a couple of verses in the Quran that shed light on how your education itself can be an act of worship. In Surah Al-Ankabut, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He gives a parable The chapter is the chapter of the spider. And he says, مثل الذين اتخذوا من دون الله أولياء كمثل العنكبوت. The parable of those who take guardians beside God is as the parable of the spider that makes for itself a house. كمثل العنكبوت اتخذت بيتا وإن أوهن البيوت لبيت العنكبوت لو كانوا يعلمون. That most surely the frailest of houses is the spider's house if they but know. And then it goes on to say, إن الله يعلم ما يدعون من دونه من شيء وهو العزيز الحكيم. Surely God knows whatever things they call upon beside Him, and He is the mighty and the wise. وَتِلْكَ الْأَمْثَالُ نَضْرِبُهَا لِلنَّاسِ وَمَا يَعْقِلُهَا إِلَّا الْعَالِمُونَ. And as for these examples, we set them forth for those, for people, and none understand them but the learned. خلق الله السماوات والأرض بالحق إن في ذلك لآية للمؤمنين. God created the heavens and the earth with truth. Most surely, there is a sign in this for the believers. When we speak about ulama in Arabic, and I'm sure those who are Muslim who are non-Arabs have heard of the term ulama, and we always associate that with scholars of religion, scholars of the sacred sciences. People who have memorized the Quran, people who know their fiqh, know their jurisprudence, people that you can go and seek fatwas from. But if you look in the Quran, those individuals are referred to as Ahlul Dhikr, the people of remembrance. But when it comes to ulama in the Quran, it's referenced in terms of material knowledge. Material knowledge in the sense that it is knowledge of the world, of nature, of creation, that takes this knowledge to knowledge of the Creator. In Surah Fatir, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ألم تر أن الله أنزل من السماء ماء فأخرجنا به ثمرات مختلفا ألوانها. Do you not see that God sends down water from the cloud? And this particular verse from Surah Fatir is pretty good because it highlights a number of fields. أنزل من السماء ماء. So He brought down water from the cloud. So we're looking at people that study weather patterns and climatology. فأخرجنا به ثمرات مختلف ألوانها. And we then bring forth therewith fruits of various colors. So now you're looking at people that study plants, botany. ومن الجبال جدد بيض وحمر مختلف ألوانها. And from the mountains, in the mountains are streaks white and red of various hues, and others intensely black. وغرابيب سود, and others intensely black. So now we're looking at mountains with all of their different colors. So now we're looking at people that study geology, study the earth, study the crusts. ومن الناس والدواب والأنعام مختلف ألوانه كذلك. And of men and beasts and cattle are various species of its likes, of it likewise. So now you're looking at people that study biology. So you're looking at the biologists, and they study physiology, and they study medicine, and they study chemistry, and study all of these things. And then the verse finishes off with, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. Surely, those only of His servants, only who are possessed of knowledge, are recognizing this type of khashya, this fear, but it's not fear of being scared. It's fear with knowledge of God. Surely God is mighty and forgiving. In Allah Azizun Ghafur. Imam Fakhr ad-Din al-Razi, looking at this verse, he says something beautiful about that. He says, Al-khashyatu biqadri ma'rifati al-makhshi. That this khashya, this fear or this awe, this awe of God is going to be based on the level of your knowledge of God. Well, how do you know God? In Islamic tradition and in Islamic theology, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. As the Quran says, there is nothing like God. You cannot envision God. You can't picture God. You can't put God in a box and say He's like this, like that, or He's like that. And even when you look in the Quran at different expressions with regards to God, if it gives you an anthropomorphic, in other words, if it gives you a human-like quality, you're meant to just ignore that, because God is not like you. God is not a human being. You are not created in God is not a physical being in that sense. And so you can't picture Him. So how do you know God? Well, you know God through His creation, through His actions. Ways of knowing God are, you could know God if you are an Arabic language linguist type of person who masters the Arabic language and Arabic poetry and such. You gain an appreciation and a recognition of God through the Quran, because you see things that other people don't see. If you are someone who is a jurist, a Muslim scholar, you gain an appreciation of God through the rulings that come about, because there's really no religion like Islam. If you look throughout all of the religions of the world, there is nothing in this world like Islam. And if you understand the deep wisdom behind the way that rulings come about in the Islamic tradition and how they construct a comprehensive legal system that takes into account not just the spiritual dimension and the material dimension, but also objectives and interactions between people. It takes into account psychology, it takes into account economics, it takes into account so many different things, and it's all intertwined and connected in very subtle ways that are so balanced with each other. If you're a jurist who's a master jurist and you look at that, and people who study fiqh, the more you study fiqh, the more you study jurisprudence, the more you become appreciative of it. And actually it becomes a spiritual experience. Studying fiqh becomes a spiritual experience for you. Same thing with people that study hadith. The more you learn about the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and the more you learn about his actions and behavior and statements, and look at the way that everything comes about, and you just recognize this is a messenger. And so your faith, it becomes a spiritual experience for you. But then more so, you're looking at the actions of God. We're now talking about the creative actions of God. People that study the world in whatever capacity that they study, that in itself can also be an act of worship if your intention is directed towards that. That I'm studying this because I want to know the source of all of this stuff. And the way that I know the source is not by picturing the source. I can't comprehend that, but I can comprehend a lot of his creation. So when I study, whatever field that you're studying in, if your intention is about gaining knowledge of God, now all of a sudden, and understanding how everything is balanced, now that becomes an act of worship. Now, when you do all of this stuff, so people that are feeling bad about themselves, that, I'm not praying enough because I have to study all these things. I mean, I get questions sometimes like, what's your daily schedule like? Are you engaged? People think that, because people have these imaginings of people that are in public sphere, that they're engaged in all of these different things. Time has, there's only so much time in the day. I can only do so many things. And so for me, for example, I'm not somebody who gets up late at night to pray, because I have to get up so that I can review my medical education. My time is restricted, so I have to spend it in doing these things. I also spend a lot of time writing and recording things and doing stuff. So I don't have the time to engage in a lot of acts of worship. Some people might feel bad about that if they're doing this. But if you're someone who's busy building a foundation for yourself so that you can learn and become a scholar in a field, and your goal behind that is to know God and to serve the people. So if you're a merchant, you're a businessman, and you build a business in a community that needs that type of business, you're serving the community. Yeah, you're benefiting from it financially, but you're also serving the community. That becomes an act of worship. So when it comes to Muslims, for example, if you have a grocery store and your intention is, I want to make sure that I bring products that are ethically brought about, that are going to be halal, they're permissible for Muslims, because my community is having trouble finding things that, there's a luxury that people have in Muslim countries that many of us, and I don't know if it's really a luxury, because it turns out if you follow some of the news, there are a lot of whistleblowing there, but let's just keep it simple. You live in a Muslim country, you go to a restaurant, you go to a grocery store, you don't really think about, let me look at the ingredients, because you trust that these products are going to be permissible products. But if you're in the West, you go to a grocery store, a lot of Muslims, the first thing they do is take the product if they're interested in it, and if they're observant, they turn it back and they look at the back and look at the ingredients, because they want to make sure that this thing doesn't have pork products, it doesn't have impermissible products in it and ingredients in it, and then they take it. So if you're a Muslim who's got, let's say, the financial means, and you say, I want to serve my community, I'm going to build a grocery store that is going to provide them with things so that they can have this peace of mind when they come in, and I'm going to make sure to provide products that are going to be permissible, they're going to be ethical, they're going to be in line with Islamic law. Now you're engaged in an act of worship. Now, for you to do these things right and to really perfect your action in it, you have to spend a lot of time and energy into that stuff. And so that will take away from your ability to engage in private acts of worship. And so this is where I want to now distinguish for you between what is an act of worship that is muta'addi or غير muta'addi. Muta'addi means an act of worship that will translate into benefit to other people versus an act of worship that will not translate to benefit for other people because it's a private act of worship. In other words, when you pray and when you fast, these are acts of worship that go back to you only and only you. But if you engage in acts of worship that, let's say, you go and pay charity, you go and volunteer your time on the weekend, you go spend an hour feeding the homeless, you go find a family that needs some help in whatever, translation or whatever it is that you're going to do, now you're engaged in an act of worship that is muta'addi. It is translating to benefiting other people. The Prophet ﷺ said, أَحَبُّ النَّاسِ إِلَى اللَّهِ أَنْفَعُهُمْ لِلنَّاسِ. The most beloved of all people to God is the one who brings the most benefit to all people. And so if you want to engage in something that makes you a religious Muslim, if you want to have a very broad understanding of what it means to be a religious Muslim, it's about checking your intention. Why are you engaged in this act, whatever it is that this act happens to be? And secondly, look to providing benefit to the community at large. That makes you a religious Muslim. It's not going to be the ritual if it's only about you, and especially if it does not change your state of being. The thing about becoming religious in Islam is that it should motivate you to looking at the world out there and wanting to align everything in a way that is pleasing to God in whatever capacity that you have to align these things in. And usually for individuals, that just happens to be in the way that when you see the needy, you go and help them out. If you see people that need some help in some aspect of their lives, you do it. If you're engaged in a business, that you look to transform your business in a way that serves the community, that is not exploited. It's not about exploiting the community, but it's about serving the community. And yeah, it's fine for you to gain from it afterwards and to benefit from these things, but your main intention behind your actions is that I want to benefit people. And so you spend your time, you direct your efforts to perfecting that. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ إِذَا عَمِلَ أَحَدُكُمْ عَمَلًا أَنْ يُتْقِنَهُ. That Allah loves when any of you engages in an action that you perfect that action. And you're not going to perfect it by distracting yourself with other things that may not be open to you. So if, just to close off on this, those of you who are coming off of Ramadan and feeling a little bit down that you were engaged in all of these things and maybe you're not engaged in them anymore, recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves most of actions, the ones that are you're most consistent with. أحب الأعمال إلى الله أدومها, even if it's little. وإن قل, even if it's little. So I would encourage you to think about being religious this year by picking up an action that is muta'addi, that has translation, that will benefit people, and don't restrict your understanding of what that is. A lot of us think of, well, I need to volunteer and I don't have time to think. Whatever action it is that you can think of that could have a benefit to the community at large, whatever capacity it is, engage in that and focus on it and try to perfect it as much as possible. But make sure that you can be consistent with it. Make sure that it's something you can stick to, and you can make it a habit. And it could be in charity, it could be in volunteering, it could be in your business, it could be whatever it is that you're doing. And that gives you a better experience as a Muslim, so that you can have. The idea behind being religious as a Muslim is that your actions should be, as much as possible, spiritually informed and spiritually influenced, as they are materially also engaged. So you want to transform your perspective so that when you go about your day-to-day life, in all of your behavior, in a way that you're trying to direct them towards being connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and towards being in the footsteps of the beloved sallallahu alayhi wasallam. I think for a comeback episode, we'll leave it at that so that was not too long. Inshallah, in the next weeks, we're going to be talking about a bit more, the complicated subjects that I talked down upon at the beginning of this. We're going to engage in that because, let's face it, it's these are questions that come up and they have to be addressed. But for now, just a quick announcement. There's going to be a new series being released on Andalus Online for Andalus Book Club. It's Philosophical Mistakes. I'm going to be doing a commentary on Mortimer J. Adler's 10 Philosophical Mistakes. It's a very good premier to understanding where errors in thought begin and how some of the questions that a lot of people come up with are really byproducts of errors of thinking at the start. And if you can fix those, you'll find many of the questions being answered and dissipated. And the second thing, there will be a video released this week for part 1 of the book that we're covering this month, which is Soul Machine by George Macari. This month, and I believe in the next little while, I'm going to be focusing a bit more on the issue of consciousness, the soul, the spirit, the intellect, the relationship between all of these things, and how we address them from an Islamic perspective. Finally, I think we'll leave it at that. I just want to thank those of you who are supporting me on Patreon. I'm trying to, if you don't know, you can support this work through patreon.com. You can become a monthly donor. You can do a one-time donation through andalusonline.org. Right now, I'm trying to upgrade my equipment. Part of the reason I'm not able to come up with things as often or as frequently as I would like to produce them is I'm working with an old MacBook Pro and I'm trying to upgrade this into a new iMac station, but that costs some money. So those of you who are supporting me, I really appreciate that. I need to get new equipment so that I can have something faster because a lot of this stuff, those of you who are into this or know how to do this, just producing one video takes forever, just waiting for this MacBook Pro to just process the information. So really appreciate the support there. If you want to become a member of Andalus Book Club, you can just go to andalusonline.org, just follow the link there, and you will get access to a bunch of videos and a bunch of book commentaries and things that have been growing over the past while. It's kind of nice to see how that's developing. With that, I bid you farewell. Inshallah, we'll see you next week in the next episode. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.